From 1907 to 1910, the Curtiss 5.8 motorcycle was everywhere in the headlines. Designed to prove that motorcycle engines could rival the power of aircraft, it achieved an unmatched success. 136 miles per hour, a land speed record that stunned the modern world. Yet behind the record-breaking glory lay a set of problems few dared to admit. Critics called it unruly, unsafe, and unrideable. Yet users, or rather admirers, celebrated its raw energy and the audacity of its builder. These are the shocking secrets of the Curtiss 5.8, the world's first motorcycle to defy gravity with sheer speed. The year was 1907. The Wright brothers had flown their fragile craft only 4 years earlier. Automobiles chugged along at 30 miles per hour, rattling over dirt roads. And the motorcycle, stripped down and loud, was the new icon of freedom for the daring. Glenn Hammond Curtiss, born in 1878, was an American tinkerer obsessed with engines. He had built bicycles, then motorcycles, then engines for dirigibles and experimental airplanes. His obsession was speed, raw, measurable, headline-grabbing speed. By mounting his air-cooled V8 aircraft engine onto a skeletal motorcycle frame, Curtiss set out not to create a consumer product, but a public demonstration of supremacy. The goal was simple: prove that Curtiss engines were the future of aviation. On January 24, 1907, on the wide sands of Ormond Beach, Florida, Curtiss did just that. He twisted the throttle and became the fastest man on Earth. At 136.3 miles per hour, he rode faster than any automobile, faster than any airplane, faster than any man had ever traveled on land. But the secrets of that machine, and the compromises hidden beneath its triumph, tell a much more complicated story. At a glance, the Curtiss 5.8 looked unstoppable. 8 cylinders, 40 horsepower, the loudest motorcycle anyone had ever heard. But what it lacked was even more telling: a proper braking system. In reality, the motorcycle was built as a one-off exhibition machine. The frame was little more than a reinforced bicycle chassis. The most obvious example of compromise was in the brakes. A simple coaster mechanism, no stronger than what a child's bicycle used. The business reason was blunt. This machine was never meant for customers. It was a marketing stunt, an advertisement for Curtiss's aircraft engines. Why engineer a sophisticated braking system for a bike no one would ever buy? The consequence, however, was chilling. When Curtiss hit 136 miles per hour, he had no way to stop. Spectators described how he cut the throttle and coasted, his feet dragging in the sand, the machine weaving dangerously as momentum fought against him. Ask almost any witness what frightened them most, and they recalled the silence after the roar, the terrifying struggle of Curtiss trying to halt a machine with nothing but sand and luck. The paradox was clear. The Curtiss 5.8 made him a legend as the fastest man alive, but it also branded the motorcycle as unrideable in any practical sense. The punchline: the fastest motorcycle in the world had the stopping power of a child's toy. The second hidden problem was structural. The Curtiss 5.8 had an engine designed for airplanes, not motorcycles. The torque and vibration of 8 cylinders firing at once was unmatched at the time. But the frame itself? It was adapted from bicycle construction. Thin steel tubes, reinforced in haste, never tested for such forces. What it lacked was rigidity. At high speeds, the frame flexed and twisted under stress. The business reason again was expedience. Curtiss needed a platform to showcase his engine, not to build a lasting product. The frame was a temporary container, just strong enough to survive a run on flat sand. The unexpected consequence was that riders, even Curtis himself, felt the machine wobble and vibrate uncontrollably above 80 miles per hour. Observers noted how the front wheel danced in the sand, the handlebars shuddering in Curtis's hands. Ask almost any engineer of the era what frustrated them most, and they would tell you the frame was the limiting factor, not the engine. The impact on reputation was double-edged. Yes, the Curtiss 5.8 proved the engine's might. But it also revealed that motorcycle frames of the era were utterly unprepared for the speeds of the future. The dramatic punchline: Curtiss had built a motorcycle that could break speed records, but not one that could safely carry a rider for even a single mile on ordinary roads. If there was one flaw Curtiss himself admitted, it was the engine's tendency to overheat. The Curtiss 5.8 was designed as an aircraft power plant, where open airflow at altitude would keep temperatures under control. Mounted on a motorcycle, however, the cooling was entirely dependent on the rider's forward speed. What it lacked was any dedicated cooling system. No fans, no liquid coolant, only the air rushing past the cylinders. In reality, the engine was an experimental prototype, air-cooled with exposed fins. At full throttle on the beaches of Florida, airflow was enough to keep the temperature stable. But during warm-ups, idling, or slower runs, the engine grew dangerously hot. The most obvious example came during early tests. Spectators noticed wisps of smoke curling from the machine after only a few minutes. Curtiss himself was forced to shut down repeatedly, allowing the metal to cool before daring another acceleration. The business reason was simple. This was proof of concept marketing. Curtiss wasn't designing for endurance or comfort. He wanted raw numbers, proof that his engines were capable of extraordinary things. But the consequence was that the motorcycle was effectively unusable outside of record attempts. Ask almost any mechanic of the time what frustrated them most, and they would say the same thing. The engine can outrun the world, but it can't keep itself alive. The impact on reputation lingered. While the Curtiss name soared in aviation, the motorcycle community whispered of an engine too hot to handle. The punchline: at 136 miles per hour, the Curtiss 5.8 was fast enough to scorch the sand, but also fast enough to scorch itself. Speed thrilled the crowds, but beneath the excitement lay a more immediate fear: fire. The Curtiss 5.8 was a raw machine, its fuel delivery system improvised for one purpose: maximum speed. What it lacked was safety containment. Fuel lines were exposed. The carburetors were mounted precariously near the rider's legs. No shielding, no insulation, no protection. In reality, Curtiss had assembled the fuel system the way a racing pilot might, with little thought for what might happen if something went wrong. And at the speeds he was chasing, things could go wrong very quickly. The most obvious example occurred during his famous run at Ormond Beach. As Curtiss thundered past 120 miles per hour, the machine backfired. A sudden pop, a flash of flame, and for a terrifying instant, spectators thought the entire motorcycle would ignite. Curtiss held on, unflinching, as the fire sputtered out in the wind. The business reason for this reckless arrangement was again clear. The motorcycle was never intended for daily use. It was a rolling billboard, not a practical product. Safety features would only add weight, reduce power, and complicate the build. But the consequence was chilling. Ask almost any rider what frightened them most about the Curtiss 5.8, and they would answer without hesitation: not the speed, the fire. The impact on the machine's legacy was lasting. Yes, it set a record. Yes, it made Curtiss a household name. But it also became a symbol of danger. A reminder that in the early days of speed, the line between triumph and disaster was thinner than a fuel line. The punchline, the Curtiss VV8 could outrun everything except its own flames. To the public, the Curtiss V8 was the ultimate motorcycle. But to anyone who tried to imagine riding it in daily life, the truth was obvious. It was impossible to control. What it lacked was practical handling. The seating position was awkward, perched high, with the rider leaning forward, clutching narrow handlebars that shook violently at speed. The throttle response was erratic, delivering bursts of power instead of smooth acceleration. In reality, Curtiss had not designed it for riders. He had designed it for one rider, himself. And he rode it only once, for the world record run. The most obvious example of its impracticality came when engineers later examined the machine. They noted how the footrests were too close to the scorching exhaust, how the steering geometry was unstable, and how even the simplest turn would have been nearly impossible at speed. The business reason was pragmatic. Curtiss wanted headlines, not customers. The motorcycle was never meant to enter mass production, so why bother making it comfortable? The unexpected consequence was that while the Curtiss V8 dazzled crowds, no one else ever truly rode it. Ask almost any early motorcyclist what frustrated them most, and they would say, it wasn't a motorcycle, it was a rocket with handlebars. The impact was bittersweet. It proved the power of Curtiss engines, but it proved nothing about the future of motorcycles. The dramatic punchline, the Curtiss VV8 was the fastest motorcycle in the world, and also the least rideable. The Curtiss VV8 may have been a one-off machine, but its shadow stretched across an entire era. In the early 1900s, newspapers hailed it as proof that the age of speed had arrived. At a time when most automobiles struggled to reach 40 miles per hour, here was a motorcycle racing at more than 3 times that speed. It ignited public imagination. Young men dreamed of machines that could break boundaries. Engineers studied the V8's daring design, even as they shook their heads at its flaws. What it lacked in practicality, it made up for in symbolism. It became an icon of raw, unfiltered progress. The most obvious example of its influence came not in motorcycles, but in airplanes. Curtiss engines powered record-setting flights, including the famous Curtiss June Bug that won the Scientific American Trophy in 1908. The V8 motorcycle was not the future of road travel, but it was a stepping stone to conquering the sky. Ask almost any historian of the era what they remember most, and they will tell you it was not the comfort, not the usability, but the sheer audacity of a man straddling a frame with an aircraft engine between his knees. Today, the Curtiss VV8 exists only in photographs, sketches, and memory. But its cultural legacy is clear. It marked the moment when speed became spectacle, and when the pursuit of records became just as important as practical transportation. The punchline of history, the Curtiss VV8 was less a motorcycle and more a symbol of humanity's hunger to go faster than ever before. Had Curtiss chosen to refine the V8, the motorcycle industry might look very different today. Instead, he turned to the skies, leaving behind a machine that was both impossible and unforgettable. The irony is lasting. The world's first 136-mile-per-hour motorcycle wasn't built to be ridden. It was built to make history.